And now I have the pleasure of introducing the three authors of the new book, Adoption Unfiltered. Sara Easterly is an adoptee. She's the founder of Adoptee Voices and the author of a memoir entitled Searching for Mom, which won many honors, along with many of her other essays and adoption-focused articles. Sara is currently on staff with the Neufeld Institute. Kelsey Vander Vliet Ranyard is a birth mother and the daughter and granddaughter of adoptees. She's worked tirelessly on public policy issues impacting adoption and focuses on raising the standards in adoption to better serve the children, mothers, and families affected by family separation. She's the co-host of the Birth Mother podcast, Twisted Sisterhood. And Lori Holden is an adoptive parent who hosts the podcast Adoption, the Long View, and is the author of The Open-Hearted Way to Open Adoption, Helping Your Child Grow Up Whole, written with her daughter's birth mother. Together, Sara, Kelsey, and Lori have written the book Adoption Unfiltered, sharing what they've learned through interviews with dozens of adoptees, birth parents, adoptive parents, social workers, therapists, and other allies, all sharing candidly about the challenges in adoption. And Adoption Unfiltered models the importance of adults in adoption working together in the spirit of curiosity and empathy to better support adoptees and their first and adoptive families. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. I'll give it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ty. And thanks everyone and Betsy and Julius and Adoption Network Cleveland. We really appreciate you hosting us. And thanks to everyone here joining us today. This is really exciting. And as Lori, we were just on a little bit early waiting for you all. And Lori pointed out that this is our first event with the book out in the world. And then it was really exciting. That was a rush, Coco, to see Coco holding the book up. It's out there. This is really, it's no longer, Amanda has it. Yes. It's no longer just this thing we're talking about in the future without even having our own copy, but it's in your hands and so exciting for us. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts if some of you have started reading it, and we'll have an opportunity for that at the Q&A. If you haven't gotten the book yet and you don't know who we are, I'll just start by giving a brief overview of, we'll just say a few more things about the book and about who we are together. Ty, you did a really great job with that, so there's not much more to say, but one thing that's kind of interesting about us, in addition to the fact that we're an adoptee, a birth parent, and an adoptive parent, is that we span some generations. So Kelsey represents the millennial generation, I represent Gen X, and Lori represents the boomer generation. So with a little sound effect there, Lori. Yeah. So we each found each other through our work, just our separately writing and educating and advocating in adoption spaces. And then came together about 3 years ago. So I'll talk about that a little bit more too. In addition to everything that Ty said, I'm founder of Adoptee Voices writing groups, where I've just really had the honor and privilege of supporting other adoptees and writing and sharing their stories. And as Ty mentioned, I'm a trained course facilitator with the Neufeld Institute, where I study and write about attachment dynamics and child development. And I mention this because this lens has hugely informed my understanding of not just attachment, but adoption and what adoptees and frankly all children need in order to adapt and mature. And a lot of things that I wish my parents had known when they were raising me. I personally had a lot of manifestations of trauma that looked sort of good and thus got missed. A lot of perfectionism, people pleasing, some anxiety that looked like just irrational fears. And so that kind of does drive me in the work that I do and supporting adoptees and their families. I feel like I misunderstood myself, and I was often misunderstood. And so a big reason for my work is wanting to counter that and help explain us to ourselves and to others. Okay, oops, I didn't, that was me. All right, Kelsey, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Vander Vliet Ranyard. I am a birth mom. Ty did a really good job of introducing everybody. But just briefly, I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Ethical Family Building. And I am the fourth generation in my family to relinquish a child for adoption. And so that has really shaped my experience in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's kind of has felt like this like family curse for a long time, but I definitely think that my placement relinquishment experience has been the catalyst for a lot of reflection in our family, and it's also shaped the way I view adoption in my work in reform policy. And so, yeah, when we started writing this book, I definitely felt like there was not, I don't know if there was enough information, if I had enough to give to a book like this. I'm 7.5 years post-placement, and 3 years ago when we started writing, or we started working on this project, I was 4 years post-placement. And so, but I think my experience here right now in this field, as well as my experience that adoption has lended itself to my whole life, was I hope was enough to write that second part of the book. And so, yeah, Lori.
My name is Lori Holden, and it's great to be here. I want to thank each of you for coming. My experience as an adoptive parent started about almost 23 years ago. My daughter is 22, my son is 20, and my husband and I have just recently completed the years of active parenting. So we were on the early wave of open adoption. I fell into a really easy open adoption with my daughter's birth mom, and therefore about 20 some years ago, I knew everything about adoption until I didn't. And that's when my real education started. It started because I realized I knew what everybody knew about adoption, which is the filtered version, the version that is told by adoptive parents, adoption professionals, and the media. And what's there to know? It's a win-win. It's a fairy tale. Everybody, there's a happily ever after once the baby comes into your arms. So I joined some online forums and was soundly told I didn't know much about adoption, and I realized that was true. And then in my own home, I realized there was so much that I didn't know. And then in my desire to learn and uncover the things that I didn't know, I was fortunate to run across people like Sara, who wrote some articles for me. We'll tell you a little bit more about how we came together, but what she was saying made so much sense. And I was like, why didn't I know this before? Well, the filters. So my learning started. My blog is almost 17 years old, lavenderluz.com. The book that I wrote with my daughter's birth mom is about 10 years old. My podcast is about to start its 5th season. So all of these are just really my attempts to learn from the lesser heard voices and pass on that learning to other people who don't know what they don't know.
Okay, so yeah, we've been in this unique working configuration as adoptee birth parent and adoptive parent we're coming up on 3 years. We just rounded up, I think, by a month to 3 years. We have in that time done a number of things together. A podcast that hopefully you've tuned into or you will tune into, that we've done a couple of seasons of so far, and then of course this book, and some articles and speaking and meeting together pretty regularly. Basically, there is the timeline, just for some background, is that Lori and I met at a launch event for my memoir, Searching for Mom. And Lori was kind and introduced herself to me, and we struck a relationship together. I had done some writing for her blog, as Lori mentioned, and then later that year, around November, there was there was some online heat, as any of you here in adoption probably know. If you've been in the spaces, there can, and just if you've been online, there can be some contention out on social media. And Lori was taking some heat, and I just, because I knew her, I checked in with her and just said, "Hey, how are you? Just as a human being, how are you doing?" And we ended up on the phone, and was one of those conversations where I think we've all had them, where you solve all the world's problems, and on top of it all, we solved adoption, like right there. And then we were like, "Oh, we should write a book together." And once you put that out in the universe, then it just kind of percolates. And, it was kind of cheeky at the time, but we were kind of serious too. And then we also knew that we wanted to have a birth parent with us. Flash forward just a couple of months to January 2021, and we were at a conference online, the Awake Influencer Conference. And Lori and I really didn't know each other that well yet still, but we saw each other both there. We said hello in the chat, like some of you are probably doing tonight. And then we were really struck by Kelsey. She was articulate, she was wise, she was current on the landscape of adoption, being so new to placement of her child, and really doing a lot of advocacy work, and so really familiar with the legalities and that side of things. And so we just said, we kind of texted each other, "I think she's the birth parent we're looking for." We reached out to her, and I think by the next week we were all meeting weekly, and from then on. So anyway, Kelsey, thank you for that yes, knowing these two unknown people. And we're just kind of grateful. We just were saying recently, like, we're really lucky because we really truly didn't know each other that well, but we just entered into this long what looks like a roller coaster on this slide, this long 3-year journey together. We needed to figure out what we were writing. We did some initial writing to try to figure out what does this take when 3 people write together. We learned from that. We figured out how to, how to be understood and how we were getting misunderstood in some of our early writing. We wrote outline of the book and pitched it. We landed an agent and a publisher. And all of that process just takes a really long time. And then we got the book deal. And then in February, we turned in the manuscript, and then here it is December, and now the book is here. So that's the roller coaster of our journey, and then starting the podcast on the way. Go ahead, Lori. It looks like
I just wanted to the slides are not showing.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm
I
not
just wanted to
sharing
let you
my
know that.
screen. Thank you for telling me. Okay. Let's do that. Let's share them. Okay. How's that? Can you see them now? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, how heartbreaking. Okay. Okay. So that's the roller coaster now, that hopefully makes a little more sense now that you see it. Okay. Okay. Let me see here. So just high-level results of our journey together is, like I said, we really didn't know each other up front. So after 3 years though, and writing a book together and doing a podcast together, we have built some true authentic relationships, where there's a professional exchange of information, personal dynamics shared and bounced around as we grow comfortable with each other, and really just a lot of growth that comes from this collaboration of working across the aisles and getting out of our silos and learning and growing from each other. Yeah, Lori, Kelsey, do you anything to add, or should I carry on?
It's been interesting to me that Sara is not my adoptee and Kelsey is not my adoptee's birth parent. But I can run by them things that are going on in my own head, or just listen to them do their sections and do their writing and learn from them about, oh, now I understand what I might be dealing with here in my personal life. But we don't have those emotionally charged things between us. So it's this kind of collaboration has been just so helpful from that standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. And vice versa for me too. Okay, just a little bit about the book, if you haven't read it yet. it is the biggest endeavor out of our endeavors. In what we started with is the premise that adoption has always been filtered by power holders, like Lori was saying, and by adoption professionals, adoptive parents, in the media. And we really wanted to get past those filters by listening to each other and getting a better picture of what adoption's really like for those of us living in it. We structured the book in ways that might seem kind of obvious based on the title, Adoption Unfiltered. We have Adoptees Unfiltered, Birth Parents Unfiltered, Adoptive Parents Unfiltered, and then a fourth section on healing and hope, because we were wondering if all the unfiltering was going to be too depressing, and we wanted to end on a note where change is possible and inspire people, hopefully. And so that healing and hope on both an individual and systemic level. Our goal all along was that the book would be adoptee centered and adoptee led. We conducted a combination of 50 different qualitative interviews within the adoption constellation, including some allies, to help tell a broad and inclusive story of adoption. As you can tell, if it's not obvious, we're 3 white women, and that does not represent adoption. So we were really striving for a lot of diversity, and diversity in a whole bunch of different areas. Diversity racially, in age, identifying gender, types of adoption, open or closed, domestic, intercountry, same race, interracial, private adoption, foster care, agency adoption, different adoption experiences, and then different perspectives on adoption, ranging from people who are abolitionists and then people who are very happy with adoption. And then a range of viewpoints on religion, religious and non-religious, and different kinds of religion. You can see this chart. We definitely skewed heavier on adoptees. I interviewed 23 adoptees. This says 27 because we did have people in dual roles. Kelsey interviewed 18 birth parents, and Lori 9 adoptive parents. And then you'll see that there's lots of other diversity there that we represented. I am excited. We have, out of those interviewees, I saw 2 are here in the room tonight. So we're really excited that Amanda and Marcy are both here. And if there's anyone else I missed, I apologize. But yeah, just, Amanda and Marcy, many of you may know, but they do represent what we were going for with it in terms of the adoptees. For sure, I was looking for adoptees who had been looking at adoption and reflecting on adoption for some time, so that they had a lot of perspective. That was also a pretty important detail for me. Kelsey, Lori, anything else would you like to add? No? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mentioned this, the reason we are adoptee centered and adoptee led is that we are the central figures in adoption, and we also are the ones whose voices have been really silenced and marginalized over the years, with a close second to birth parents. So birth parents come as a close second on that. The book is, we consider it psychoeducation supported by personal stories. We really could have filled whole volumes to include the breadth and depth of the stories shared by the people we interviewed. But what we realized pretty quickly is the idea wasn't to share their stories. That's for them to do, and many of them have done that already. But the goal was to share the larger story of adoption. Like I said, the ways adoptees are often misunderstood and by others, and often by ourselves. So, it was really just kind of overlaying the research and the personal anecdotes to try to tell that broader story, and then do the same for birth parents and adoptive parents. And then it's heavily researched and informed by attachment-based science, child development, and separation trauma. Just some of the names I mentioned, I'm on staff with the Neufeld Institute. So that work has of Dr. Gordon Neufeld definitely influenced my perspectives. Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Jaron Kim, Bruce Perry, Joyce McGuire Pavo, and the list goes on. So a lot of research went in it as well. So I think what we thought we would do is stop yapping at you and read a little bit. So each of us will read a little bit from the book. And Kelsey, if you're ready, if you have your book.
I'm
you
not
have
ready
my
because I don't have my book and I have
Still haven't
I have
got-
to get my manuscript, so you go first.
Okay. Or Laura, why don't you go first, Lori? Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go. And I'm asking Tim, how is my sound? Am I still too loud? Do I sound okay? All right. All right. I'm going to read from the third section, which is Adoptive Parents Unfiltered. And this is where we are trying to introduce adoptive parents to ourselves and also to our counterparts in adoption. One of the chapters in here that probably influences so many adoptive families is a chapter on insecurity. We aren't always aware of the insecurity, but it drives us from underneath. And so I'm going to read you a passage about that from chapter 16. The ability and willingness for adoptive parents to make space for birth parents, physically and emotionally, is a critical component for the emotional health of the adoptee and the strength of the relationship between the adoptee and their parents. Adoptee and playwright Suzanne Bachner told me this during a podcast interview. An adoptive parent can start carving that space from day zero, before the kid comes into their home even. It needs to be a co-creation to keep space for those other people who are part of the kid. Carving out space offers an unexpected benefit for the adoptive parents. For when an adoptee feels like they do not have permission to think about and wonder about their birth parents, they are apt to create fantasy birth parents and have fantasy attachments to them. How can an actual known parent who puts limits on behavior, bedtime, snacks, and activities compete with a fantasy birth parent? It's a paradox of adoptive parenting. If an adoptive parent wants their child's heart, they need to be willing to share it with whomever else the adoptee needs to invite in. Healing from insecurity is something adoptive parents need to champion within themselves, between them and their adoptees, and radiate outward to help change society's ideas about what an adoptee-centered adoption looks like, one in which there is space for all. I'm making it sound simple, though it's not always so straightforward. Likely, moving past insecurity is something each adoptive parent may have to address again and again over time. Working through issues of insecurity can transform an adoptive parent from someone who avoids contact to one who creatively seeks contact with birth family members, thereby bringing a spirit of true openness to the adoptee. Healing from insecurity, or not, has effects that ripple through generations. Parents are wise to find their new path of feeling secure in their role as parents, trusting that the existence of birth parents is not a threat, but rather a pathway to extended family. To be able to metabolize insecurity about birth family and culture and transform it into openness and curiosity is one of the greatest gifts a parent can give their child. And I will turn it over to Kelsey.
Okay. I'm ready now. I'm going to be reading from chapter 13, which is Downstream Effects of Our Decision. In 1992, at age 27, my father reunited with his birth mother, whom I know as my Grandma Peggy. With the help of my mother, he jumped through hoops in Illinois to find her, with only a surname to guide him. When he did reunite with his birth mother, he found he had half-siblings as well. In 1993, my parents welcomed a baby girl who turned out to be me. When I was 2 months old, we all traveled from Chicago to Southern California so my father's maternal birth family could meet me and embrace me into their family. Now and forever, our family. My grandmother bathed me, her long-lost son's daughter, in her bathroom sink, and treasured that day for the remainder of her life, looking back on it with pride and radiant joy every chance we had to be together. When she passed away in 2021, she left me a scrapbook with photographs of her bathing me in the sink, and so every time I open that page, the moment lives on. When people speak about the lacework of family, it's common to refer to the family tree. While the tree is suitable for intact families, I envision my family as a time-worn pair of blue jeans, with every ancestor and relative as a stitch. In my family, I am the fourth consecutive generation to relinquish a child for adoption. 3 infant adoptions and 1 step-parent adoption have frayed our stitches along a single bloodline in the last century. Some of the rips and tears have been sewn back together loosely, but the thread is weak and doesn't quite match. Between my stitch and the stitches of separated family members, there are lost years and memories that never were. At the time of my infancy, it appeared that the split seams of my family's history of separation were being patched back together. I never imagined that in my early 20s, I would continue the trend and find myself disjoining a new stitch. For the first few years after placing my child for adoption, it was easy to live in ignorance that my child would stay little and adorable forever. It was effortless for me to believe that my experience of relinquishment and adoption was mine alone to lament because my child could not yet audibly sing the duet. I could reside in my own self-pity forever because this was something that happened to me, and to my knowledge at the time, no one else. However, when my child began to ask questions, it shocked me. It was heartening to know that he thought about me, but this information also held an uncharted future that I had not yet reckoned. I racked my brain for all the possible questions my child might ask, with no inquiry being considered too dark, to prepare an answer for the future. I soon realized that so much of my story was tangled with my child's story. Where exactly was the line? Where did my story stop and his story begin? I knew there was a separation somewhere. I felt it, I experienced it, I remembered it. But precisely where could I pencil it in? The hard truth I had to accept was that I had a meager understanding of adoption in our stories. My family's story of separation and adoption did not end with me. It will continue to be written long after I'm gone, just as my late grandmother's adoption story is still echoing throughout our lives today. Adoption's life cycles have been impacting me throughout my entire life, but I had little grasp of the magnitude. Just as I had not yet met the reality of my little one as the adult he will become, I had also never paused to picture the adults in my life as the children they once were. My father was once a young adoptee with questions, and now he's an adult adoptee who still has questions. The stitches on our family's tattered blue jeans don't simply hold the denim together. They embroider our history with a rich and complicated story. Every stitch, attached or not, is intrinsic to the garment. Watching our children grow up is difficult, whether they are the child we parent every day or the child we placed for adoption. There are questions our children may have that will absolutely be uncomfortable, even potentially re-traumatizing to answer. Our relinquishment, from a legal perspective, terminates our parental rights and responsibilities, giving us a false sense of security as though we don't have a duty to our children. On the contrary, we hold crucial duties to help them discover their origin stories and biological information. Additionally, we also have a moral obligation to show up as healthy as we can for our children, while also respecting boundaries and never causing divided loyalties. Legalities aside, our children grow up and become adults, whether we factor this into our initial decision. Our roles and responsibilities as birth parents never vanished with our signature upon consent forms. Sarah?
Okay, and I was adjusting my audio. I got a note from Tim that it was really quiet. So is this any better? Does this help? Can you all hear me? Okay. Or is it still quiet? Okay. Okay, I'm going to read from chapter 22, Journeying Home. I need my glasses, so and I don't have them here. Chapter 22, Journeying Home, Words of Encouragement for Adult Adoptees. I love the concept of the hero's journey, a narrative pattern articulated by Joseph Campbell, in which a hero was called to venture out of the ordinary world into a journey through the unknown. Along the way, there are mentors, challenges, and temptations. There's revelation, death, and rebirth, which lead to the hero's transformation and return home, literal or within oneself. Many well-known films and stories follow this structure, including one of my all-time favorites, The Wizard of Oz, which, interestingly, many adoptees say resonates for them too. Perhaps this is because every adoptee is on a hero's journey. Through the act of adoption, we've already been placed into the great unknown. It is up to us to decide if and when and how we venture further into the wilderness. Like Dorothy, our hearts long for transformation, to return home anew, in whatever ways that looks like for each of us. It might involve seeking clues about our roots to learn more about where we come from, to inform who we are, and to understand how our birth parents and cultures influence us. It may be coming to a place of rest in our adoptive families, discovering that there we have found a sense of true belonging that comes not through the act of adoption, but through years of lived experiences together and the trials and triumphs of family life. It may be discovering confidence and a true sense of identity after years of its elusiveness. It could be each of these things or all of these things and any number of other possibilities. Each journey is unique and deeply personal, and we often don't realize we're on a journey until looking back and seeing how far we've come. Sometimes it's only clear after we've arrived at a destination or as we pass mile markers along the way. No matter where you are in your journey, you will need mentors. That's what this chapter is about, offering support and guidance from fellow adoptees who've been journeying in the wilds of adoption too. While it may seem lonely at times, rest assured you aren't alone. Many others have trailblazed these paths, and countless others will too. Our routes and any obstructions along the way may be individual, but as our paths meander and wind, we'll crisscross and intersect. Let's help each other out, waving hello from atop the hills, reaching a hand down into the steep valleys, and refilling each other's water bottles when we're thirsty. The journey can be formidable at times, but the sweeping views from the mountaintops are breathtaking and best enjoyed in each other's good company. Okay. All right. So those are our readings. I think we'll just briefly touch on some of the things we've learned and some of the insights that have come from this book. In the process of writing the book, I'm going to share my screen one more time. Give you a sense of what it's been like working together. I know Adoption Network Cleveland has a lot of configurations such as this with people throughout the constellation. And so this may be things you have already learned too. But one of our big takeaways is that we learned that working across adoption roles requires a lot of vulnerability. From an adoptee's perspective, I'll say that it can be really vulnerable to be in spaces with adoptive parents and birth parents, especially when your own or others in the constellation may have caused personal hurt. And as Lori touched on, there's a challenge of not projecting those experiences onto your colleagues. So creating a space for vulnerability required that we all valued connection, compassion, and a willingness to listen, to understand each other. We were writing the book from our own dark and vulnerable places. So we had to trust each other first when sharing up our words with each other for review and for refinement. Kelsey, Lori, do you have anything else you'd add?
I can't see if Kelsey wants to speak, but Sarah, can you back up the slide just one?
Oh, of course.
Oops. I'll just say that being vulnerable, as Sarah said, is really hard because you're showing your belly to people and you can be hurt. But what we learned through this is that is how you build empathy and compassion. And that served me in my own adoption relationships in my own home. Working my empathy muscle with Sarah and Kelsey and listening to understand and not to respond helped me in my own adoption configuration. That is not to say that there was never any conflict. We may be telling you in the next few slides about some of the conflict and the emotions that came from the conflict that we had, but that's what I wanted to say about the vulnerability.
I would say that there was a time where when we were already writing our chapters, and every week we would come together and we would have each other edit or give feedback and work out some of the kinks. And there was a time where I was like, guys, I don't think I have much more content to give. I was like, I think part of it was, I think as birth parents, a lot of times we kind of get caught on the outside looking in. We're not in the home with our child and their parent, and so there's potential for that relationship to be A and B and you're C. And so I think that there are dynamics that I personally, not dynamics that Lori and Sara replicated in that way, but for me, my insecurities were definitely replicated into parts of the writing process, and part of that was this hesitancy to be vulnerable with other members of this constellation and triad. So I think that once they kind of talked me off the ledge a little bit, because I thought, man, I don't play as active as a role as you two do. Is there any more else I can say? And of course, their answer was yes, of course. Everything that you have to say about the birth parent experience is important and relevant, and you need to basically dig a little deeper and get a little more vulnerable, which is not a strength of mine at times. And so it does require vulnerability, but it also requires trust. Me being able to trust the other members to be vulnerable and know that that's not going to be judged or discounted in any way. So
Thank you, Kelsey. One of the other things we learned is that filters are still important. Lori, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it actually took us a little while to settle on the name of the book. We didn't know what it was until we realized what we were doing is trying to take down all the filters. And then we got really excited about taking down all the filters. And then in my writing, specifically, I realized that I had taken down the filters too much. And the story we can share with you that's behind the scenes is that originally in the book, there was a chapter in the adoptive parents unfiltered section called Baby Fever. And I really love the way it turned out to introduce adoptive parents to themselves about this phenomenon we have where especially if we're coming to adoption through infertility, and if especially go through fertility treatments, and our main questions are how much and how fast can I get a baby? And when we shift that from a medical track to an adoption track and everything changes, we don't realize that everything's changed and those questions are now inappropriate, and they make us myopic, and it turns things into a commodification. So this is a great way to introduce ourselves to ourselves, but through early readers who are not adoptive parents, we found that the filters, it was too unfiltered. It was really hard for adoptees in particular to read that section that sounded so commodifying. So we did an emergency rewrite. I had the support of my two co-authors to write this to come up with a better way to remove those filters, but also what we ended up with is that we filter for kindness. We want to keep kindness and accessibility in, but we wanted to take the filters away for voices and experiences. So we did have to reinsert our filters a little bit. Do you have anything else to say on that, Sara or Kelsey?
well, I just want to say that not only did we have Lori rewrite some of that chapter, we also make her talk about it now in our presentations. But it is an important lesson I think we all kind of learned. I think there's also filters that birth parents, especially when talking to our adoptees, I think that there's certain filters that are good to keep up as well. I think in order to center the adoptee, it's not the worst thing. I think that there are moments that are appropriate to listen and understand each other from all sides, but also there are moments where the other person may not be ready or have the capacity to handle that information. And when I say that person, I mean the adoptee. So it's important to listen and be cautious and in what we share, and when.
Yeah, thank you. And I would add that, filtered spaces are really important too. That's my adoptive voices it's where we can tell it like it is. It's good for support. But then it's good to get across and take those down too. So, and recognizing that sometimes there are some filters even. When we have this idealistic vision of removing them all, we're not standing naked. For sure. Another key thing that we learned through this configuration is that power dynamics are always at play, and they're everywhere. And it's been kind of fun. I mean, it's probably obvious when you read my section of the book that I have a real passion for psychology and just human dynamics and how things happen. And it was really kind of fun. Not necessarily always in the moment, but when we caught dynamics of adoption or power dynamics happening in our relationship, then it was fun for us to be able to dissect those. So Kelsey, and do you have anything you want to share about that?
I think this writing process allowed us to explore the depths of the power dynamics, and because we've had this safe and secure space with the three of us working on this, and getting to know one another over the course of 3 years. I think we were able to pinpoint scenarios where power dynamics are at play where maybe I wouldn't have recognized 3 years ago on my own. And so just through conversation and writing and reading and editing and everything, I think we've really nailed down so many areas where power dynamics are at play, and I have a whole chapter about it. So yeah.
One of the ways that power dynamics came to play in our birthing this book was in getting a publisher and an agent. And I didn't see it. Sara had to point it out to me because we scouted out a lot for an agent and a publisher for an adoptee-led and adoptee-centered book. And we ended up going through an agent and a publisher that I had previously, because I was an adoptive parent and that voice was more acceptable. And so that I hadn't even seen those power dynamics until it was pointed out to me.
Yeah, I did point that out because I'm still a little sore about my I was clearly sore about my memoir, and it is true. I mean, we're breaking through that. I think that has happened, thankfully, kind of over the course of these 3 years that has happened. But when I was pitching my memoir, I was repeatedly told adoption books don't sell. And then I was looking around and going, oh, no, they do sell, but they're sold when they sell better and more easily when they're not written by an adoptee because we're perceived as angry. And so luckily we're on a wave, and that's changing, but that was definitely a piece of this process for us. Adoption dynamics are always at play. I think, it's good. This is, like we've said a few times now, this isn't our own adoption constellation, so that's great. But sometimes just our roles would come to play. One of the things that comes up for me is as an adoptee, I'm almost always unconsciously living and operating with this core belief that I'm replaceable or interchangeable. So there's a lot of things I do in our working configuration of documenting, because I'm assuming at any point, if I get kicked out of the group, or I might, something will happen, that I get swept away, that I want to make sure the project lives on. So anything from that subtle stuff to just the unconsciously needing to prove my worth in the group, we had one story that was kind of funny. While working on a presentation together, we were in Google Slides, and can you hear my puppy barking? Is that distracting? Okay. Okay, good. Just had to make sure. We were working on slides, and trying to get our thoughts out, and I was typing on one line, and right below me, Lori was typing on another line, and I felt myself getting really activated. I didn't know why at the time, but I was like, trying to be an adult, I've got to go. And then realized later that it was because I felt like the adoptive parent in the room was speaking over me, and just like literally on the slides. So we have a great relationship now where I can, again, it's kind of fun to see this stuff. So I could call Lori and say, oh, guess what? This is what was happening. And I don't think it's going to work for me to work like that in the future. I need to get my thoughts out before you go on there. So, and Lori didn't react in the fragile, defensive ways that sometimes can happen out online and when out in these spaces, but she heard me, and we understood each other a little bit more. Lori, anything to add?
One other time that adoption dynamics were at play was when Sara and Kelsey broke it to me that I needed to rewrite that chapter. And I did not take it well. Although I think I've worked through the adoption insecurity, my writing insecurity was still there. I wanted to be a good partner. I wanted to make sure I was pulling my weight, and to know that I hadn't done that was really hard, and I fell apart. And one of the dynamics that came out of me falling apart was Sara taking care of me, the adoptee taking care of the adoptive parent, even though it was more of in a writing dynamic, but you could just see that that us falling into those roles as well. So, but again, because we have this working relationship where we trust each other, we could talk about it later and dissect it and come at it from a curious and open standpoint instead of a defensive standpoint.
Another thing we learned is that reaching across the aisles can help in other areas. So I will just say there's been such a gift in this relationship. We've probably gotten the idea. We've had some hard things to maneuver through. So, we speak hard things in the book, and then we speak hard things to each other. And just the gift in seeing that relationships still hold, even when they're tested, is huge for me as an adoptee. And then the process of unsiloing has helped us professionally. I think we all now feel more comfortable reaching out to others in our work, and seeing how the picture gets completed when we include viewpoints that are not just our own. That's myself. Kelsey.
Yeah, I think in my work and just advocacy and policy work, we've all been introduced to each other's bubbles, which is huge, and a huge benefit of having 3 people write a book together. We all come from the adoption community, but we realized that we had been occupying completely separate spaces, completely separate corners of this community, and with very little cross-pillar work. There were some people that Sara kind of ran with that I barely knew, maybe knew their names, heard their names, but didn't know them. And there were a few people that Lori associated with that same thing, you just kind of knew someone's name. And I'm sure the same in my corner for them, but we've kind of been witnessing the power that is created when we all can work together in some capacity, not discounting the importance of our separate spaces, because they bring so much benefit to our people and in our bubbles, but to merge when given the opportunity, and when it can be effective and healing and powerful is really so invaluable. And so in policy and advocacy work, I think the 2 voices that we just don't hear authenticity from, because we're not actually giving them the mic, adoptees and birth parents. And so this, in my work right now, today, the fourth federal bill, adoption related bill in Congress was introduced today. The opportunity to have access to all of these spaces and say, hey, this is going on, and give them that information before it gets dropped into Congress. Give them the opportunity to look at the language before in draft form, to give them the opportunity to endorse it with their organization, to maybe make suggestions for changing the language. That's huge. I think like birth parents, God, we've never been given an opportunity before. Adoptees a lot of times haven't either. And to be able to look at this federal bill, I've been working on the Adopt Act for the past 3 years as well, and look at all of these endorsing organizations that include several adoptee rights organizations, and as well as birth parent organizations, and to look at those lumped in with the usual suspects, all collaborating to advocate for reform in this space where it's so desperately needed, is really powerful. And I really, really, really don't think that list, that collaborative list of endorsers, was even going to be possible without the themes that we worked on in this book, and without the network that we've created with this book, at least for my sake. So.
Yeah, we've come to realize that there's such an important space to have our silos. Adoptees On for adoptees, and Twisted Sisterhood for birth parents. And there's spaces where you can really be raw with each other. But this working across the aisles helps you do what Kelsey was talking about. And then also, like she was saying, for me to have access to Sarah's bubble and Kelsey's bubble of people who have been thinking and feeling critically about adoption and have something to teach me as an adoptive parent, have something to show me about their experience. They haven't just accepted it, the win-win narrative. You know, when you hear somebody say, oh, I know an adoptee who is so happy with their adoption, my next question is, but have they thought about it critically? Have they come out on the other side after some thought? So that thinking and that access to people who are doing this, this nuanced, this in-between, this hard work to come out on the other side of thinking and feeling about adoption has been so valuable to me and to the people that I try to reach with my creative work.
The last point, I think we've learned so many more than 6 points, but the last one we'll share, and then we want to hear questions from you all. But recognizing the long arc of adoption and adoption advocacy. This is true for us as individuals, that, for adoptees, we don't realize it until we start aging, but oh my gosh, here's adoption again, and another form of adoption. And here's adoption again now that, this is happening. So there's that on an individual level, but also on a systemic level. We learned a lot through this book of just the history of adoption in America, how it's evolved over the decades and generations, and how people are experiencing it now. And then we've also just recognized that we feel like we're on a wave. We're at this point in time where more and more education is coming to be, and we are a part of that, and we're standing on the shoulders of all who came before us. And so it's just really exciting to be a part of it, and to see the evolution, and to also think about the future and where we're going to grow next. Kelsey and Lori, did you add
Yeah,
anything to
I definitely, and just from the chapter that I read from my portion of the book, I think this writing process has helped me recognize the long arc in my own story and my own family. But I think also in the pursuit of reform, it has given me kind of a window in to the possibilities of what can happen when people work together, and when the voices of marginalized people are heard very clearly and loudly. And so there's this, so in policy work, there's this thing called the policy window, and it's this concept. It's part of a theory of a public policy theory, like a policy analysis theory. So I don't want to get too in the weeds. Anyways, the policy window is this little blip of time where kind of like the stars align and things can happen in that little window. So what happens in the theory of it all is the legislators take an interest, and the advocates they hit their stride, and the society begins to care, and this becomes an issue that's placed on the agenda. This is, this is important. And that policy window is that window of opportunity where the nation and the legislators, the policymakers, they take interest in something and they do something about it. But that policy window isn't open forever. And so that's your chance. And then once the policy window closes, that's basically no one cares anymore. No one's interested in this, and you've missed it. And so this whole year, our team and I at Ethical Family Building, we've been like, this feels like something's happening. And then when I get in my meetings with Sarah and Lori, we're like, we feel like something's happening here. And so I feel like the policy window is opening. The policy window, and it's more than policy. It's you're changing hearts and minds, and you're helping other people understand you and the people in your constellation and how adoption impacts us all. And so I just feel like our window is open right now. And I think there's a sense of urgency that comes with that, especially for me, because my wheels in my brain, my gears are always spinning and I can't turn it off. But I think that it's an exciting time. And I know that some people listen to that and they think that I sound really naive, and that's fine because I don't care. But I think that this is an exciting time, and we're really on the brink of change in some capacity. And I think that I hope that that's kind of a takeaway with this book as well. And so I guess with the long arc, yes, there is a long arc, but there are windows of opportunity. And I hope that this helps people seize that when it comes along.
I'm so jazzed to be part of this, as Sarah said, thinking about the past and continuing the work of so many people before us. And then as Kelsey talks about being on this a different kind of bubble that is a wave that's carrying us forward. When I think about the arc of adoption, I think of perspective, and I think about it in the micro way, which is in my home. I can remember when my kids were maybe 4-ish years old and adoption stuff hadn't come up yet, and because I didn't understand child development, I was like, oh, we've gotten through this scot-free. and then of course perspective changes as you go through hard things. And then also, I can remember thinking that closed adoption was the default setting. Open adoption was a funky new thing. As we evolve adoption, we are not done evolving adoption. But, in this research and learning more about the arc of adoption, the history of adoption, all the ways that we messed it up in the 20th century with the fundamental belief that a baby's a blank slate and nothing that matters before they reach the arms of their forever parents matters. Now we have the brain science. Now we have better practices. Now we have adoptees raising their voices. Now we have birth parents raising their voices. And this needs to continue to evolve. And as Kelsey says, we are in position. There's a window to do that now.
Okay, so there's the hope and healing that we'd like to end on. And I think now we'd love to just open up for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and that way we can see you all better too. And I know we had some questions already come in ahead of time, and we would love to hear questions from each of you. I guess just to start too, you held up books. Has anyone already read the book? We're just curious if has anyone read it or is this brand new to you? Okay. All right. It's not a quiz. It's
Yay,
okay.
yay,
Don't write the
Linda.
wrong answer.
Linda's
Oh,
one of our early readers.
oh, that's right. Hi, Linda. I didn't see you
Hi.
here.
Oh, hi.
Great. Oh, good. Okay. Well,
Such a great presentation tonight. Thank you, guys. Thank you all.
thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay. So Ty, should we start with the questions that came in ahead of time?
I think so. I also wanted to point out, if you scroll up in the chat a little bit, I put links for all of your books and podcasts and everything, because you've got some really great work out there in other places that are accessible right now while we wait to get our books. For those of us who are waiting to get those, that'll get you started on some of this great work that these ladies have been up to over the years. We did get a few questions in. When you do your registration through our site, we have a place where registrants can ask a question ahead of time, if they so choose to. One of the questions was about what happens when open adoptions close, and I was wondering if, like, Sarah, would you like to take the lead on that?
I'll go ahead and answer that one, because a lot of time this question could come from one of two ways, depending on who's doing the closing. The power holder in the dynamic is the adoptive parent. So I'll speak to when the adoptive parents are closing. In my section of the book, in trying to make it very adoptee centered, I try to come at this through prevention of closing. We also talk a lot about what open adoption means and what closed adoption means. It's always meant contact, which I think is insufficient. We lay out the case why it's an imprecise measure, it's an exclusionary measure, and there's a better measure, and that is openness. And my observation is that the adoptees I talk to who feel more connected to their parents and feel like they were parented well, had parents who could enter into conversations about adoption, adoptedness, and birth parents with them, whether birth parents were present or not. And so openness, I think just being able to enter into those spaces by healing our own, addressing our own insecurity and some other things, makes it so that parents are more likely to want to seek out contact when they have a spirit of openness, rather than look for reasons to close off contact. So a lot of it's preventative, a lot of it is reorienting on the adoptee and trying to see what closing off contact or not being able to talk about birth parents who can't be there, the effect that has on not only the adoptee, but on the relationship between adoptee and adoptive parent, because it has a big relationship. If you can't talk to your parents about something, what do? You can't feel close to them. Now, Kelsey, maybe you have something to say about birth parents closing?
Yeah, I do think it's a different conversation for birth parents who are in a open adoption that closes. We hear this all the time. And it's always like just heartbreaking. There's a lot of dishonesty that happens in these situations where the open adoption closes and promises were made that would not be the case. And we've done some work at Ethical Family Building to legal research, statute research across the country on post-adoption contact agreements. They are enforceable in 29 states, some with stipulations on how they're formed and what has to be done for that to be enforceable. However, that's a much higher number than what people think. People think that often think that they're not enforceable in any state, which is not true. However, that tells me a couple different things of why people don't know about this. We're doing a horrible job of messaging, for one. And on two is there's a major accessibility problem in getting these PACAs enforced. You have to hire an attorney. You likely go through mediation. All of these things are kind of scary to do if you're a birth parent and you're not the power holder. When you don't have a PACA and you don't live in a state where your PACA is enforceable, even if you did have one, there's not much that you can do. So we give advice as in terms of keep trying to open that door. Keep sending that email every 6 months or annually or whatever it is, to keep pressing and share about you and what's going on with you and keep that door open. If not, and if you can't do it, I'm trying to think. There's a birth mom that I'm good friends with who is in this exact situation. And what she does every year is she writes basically the same email every year to say, you missed the update that you're supposed to send me. Also, I would love to meet her. Please let me know when this will be possible. This has been going on for 10 years. This is not a solution, but this is not a cure. It's a treatment. That type of thing where you have to keep trying and keep putting that effort in. Not that that should be your job, but that is what you're left with. We need post-adoption contact enforcements across the whole country. Right now, that's not happening, but it is something that we definitely need when we look at this lens of reform. I'm going to drop in the chat this is a link to one of our websites, Adopt Change, where you can see some of the state laws surrounding open adoption contact enforcement. But I do think that keeping with the spirit of openness and that concept that Lori talks about is really something that we should be shifting towards, especially in the way that we educate both birth parents and adoptive parents. That pre-adoption education piece is so important for both parties to understand what type of relationship this actually is. And I think that education piece, plus having enforceable contact agreements all across the states, would play a huge part in lessening these circumstances where these adoptions close. So.
We had another question in the chat about how openness impacts outcomes for adoptees. Beyond openness, what are your top recommendations about what needs to change in adoption policy and practice?
Yeah, hi Erica, good to see you. I do want to clarify, and I think I want Lori to touch on this because there's an important distinction that we make in the book. The research I think that you're referring to that Adoptee Sara was talking about is open adoptions do not have a significant outcome difference. And that is because the grief and the relinquishment, the loss is there, whether it's an open adoption or not. And Lori does a lot of explaining in her section. You have a whole chapter on this, Lori, so I'll let you talk to it, but just the difference between an open adoption and openness, like you were getting at, but earlier, we don't have, I mean, Lori's putting in some citations here on openness and the difference of that. So I guess, Lori, I'm just going to turn it over to you, but from the adoptee's perspective, it's really important for me to distinguish that loss is always there. I think that's the reason that open adoption is not a Band-Aid or a panacea, is because any adoption is founded upon loss, and no matter how you shape the adoption, there's loss.
Yeah, and if we're measuring an open adoption by whether or not you have contact, which can mean anything from sending one text a year, one newsletter a year, having a PO box between you, to living near each other and going on vacations together. It's a very imprecise term, and it is not what makes the difference. Openness is the word you used, Erica, and that actually is what makes the difference, but it's not the same as having contact. And it's Dr. Jae-Ron Kim and Angela Tucker who I cited them in there. They said that the 3 benefits of openness, and if I can remember these, are it helps the adoptee build their sense of identity. It helps strengthen, not weaken, the relationship between adoptee and adoptive parent. And it helps with the healing of a sense of abandonment or rejection, because they have the space to process it. They have permission to have their full range of emotions, which is something that Sara emphasizes so much in her sections too, to feel the loss, and to have somebody alongside you who's not trying to fix it, who's not trying to overlook it, who's not trying to patch it up, but is just there alongside you. And that's what I call openness. And that's my call for other people to call openness, is to be able to allow adoptees and everybody involved in adoption their full range of emotions about things, and have us actually deal with what adoption is, what it feels like in different moments.
As far as recommendations for change in adoption policy and practice, I guess how much time do you have? Because I think I could write a whole book on just that alone. But I don't need to do that right now. I'm a little busy. So I think I don't know. I think that same resource I just dropped in the chat, Adopt Change, we keep a finger on the pulse of all of that stuff, and we often are giving presentations to professionals in the field, agencies and attorneys alike, on best practices. And every time we are presenting on a new concept, or not a new concept, because we're not engineering completely new concepts. These are things that people have been talking about for decades. But every time we do talk to professionals about something that they should change about the way they practice, they look at us like we're the crazy California people trying to regulate everybody and tell them what to do. And they're right. So, but we are pests in the best way, and we keep coming back, and eventually they kind of hop on board and say, all right, whatever, we'll do it. So we are often hosting those conversations with professionals, even when they show up, even if they begrudgingly show up, they show up, and those conversations are ongoing. But I would follow along with us on Adopt Change to kind of keep tabs on our policy recommendations and practice recommendations.
Thank you for sharing that. And just so you know, after the meeting, we'll post the link for the recording. I'll do a follow-up email to everyone. I'm keeping these links that have been shared, and I'll send those out to everyone tomorrow, so that we all have them. Thank you for sharing those. We had another question that was posed before the presentation tonight. What can prospective adoptive families do to continue their learning on trauma-informed caregiving? What resources, communities, or recommended reading can you suggest?
Well, I'm biased in saying definitely read our book. Definitely read Adoption Unfiltered. Our hope is definitely that prospective adoptive parents read the book. Kelsey and I both speak a lot about informed consent. And I have a strong personal feeling that adoptive parents are not given informed consent. And I'm going to let Kelsey talk about, birth parents are definitely not either, but I'll let you share about that next, Kelsey. But, I think learning from read our book, please, and read a lot of adoptee perspectives, because I think that will give you a picture of what adoption is really like, and read widely. That is why we have so many adoptees in the book, is to help give that informed consent. I will say for myself, the information I gave to my friends when we were in our 20s, before I started looking at adoption, was, yeah, just adopt. And it was said in that way of, sure, look at me, I turned out great. And I encouraged adoptions. So that, now I've got to backtrack, and it's like, these same friends who pursued adoption did not have informed consent from me, because I was not willing and able to look at adoption closely. And so I parroted things I thought that needed to be said and that I thought they wanted to hear. That's not helpful. adoption does affect us for our entire life, and it's a different parenting journey. You know, we can struggle attaching deeply because we have such a very big gaping wound that is going to affect us. That doesn't mean it's not possible. That doesn't mean all hope is not lost. That's why we have that other chapter, but it's something that parents need to know beforehand. So I really appreciate the question. I appreciate you asking it and thinking about that and going in with your eyes wide open, because there's pain and loss, and society does not do any justice to this situation, because society will tell us all the time how beautiful adoption is, and it's a win-win, and isn't it, you know, so fantastic. And it can be things, it can be beautiful, it can be that, but it can't be it without all the loss as well.
I'll just say that being able to work on this group project while Sarah was doing all this research, this attachment-based research and child development research, and incorporating that into the book alongside the interviews that she conducted with adoptees was so I mean, really like 1 in a million experience, because obviously I'm the only birth parent that wrote the birth parent side of the book, so I got to witness this firsthand. But my child is 7, and I was watching her collect all this information while I'm 7 years post placement, and I'm like reading some of what she's writing and being like, oh my gosh, I never knew this. I never knew this. This is really useful. This is really powerful. I can't wait for my child's parents to read this too. So not in any like, you know, way that's it wasn't in a like, oh, I can't wait for them to read this. It was more like they're going to find this useful too, because this is going to ultimately serve our child so well. This, just to have this information will be huge. And so that was, but now I think, okay, there's all these families that are going to adopt in the future, and they need this information too. If, you know, if the professional isn't going to give you this information, okay, well, we will. So I hope that the education doesn't stop there. We want it to go deeper, and we want it to come from also professionals as well. However, I think we were a little sick of waiting on them to do that work, because I don't think that day was ever going to come if we hadn't. So informed consent on the birth parent side absolutely is not happening. But I also know that, I don't know, writing a resource like this is like the point of no return. Once you know this, we always say you don't know what you don't know, but once you do know it, you can't unknow it. So you have to do something with it. And if you don't, what a waste. So I will say that about birth parents and informed consent, as well as adoptive parents and informed consent. I really hope that this guides a new process for giving them that informed consent, whether that's incorporating this into pre-adoption education, post-adoption education, all of the above. It's important. All of the information contained in this book may be biased, but it's important. And it's important to know early. People shouldn't have to wait, 40, 50 years to start to understand this. They should have access to this stuff right away. So
I'll just add that in that question, all the trauma-informed caregiving is really just good parenting too. See the person in front of you as they are today. Accept them. Don't have judgment. Be confident in your own leadership as a parent, and be grounded and humble and curious. You can do all that research, but in the moment, you have to know, like, you have to be rooted and grounded in yourself, and have some confidence too.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. We'll open it up to the group.
Ty, there was one other question that came in early. Do you want me to take a stab at that one?
Sure. Did I miss one? I might have. Go ahead.
Well, it's related, and we've covered it a little bit. How do we navigate domestic closed adoption? And I think that's such a great question, because even when parents do want an open adoption, there's lots of reasons why they might not be able to have that contact. but they can still have that openness, and they can still open conversations with their child about the absent birth parent. They can do what Holly Van Golden calls dropping pebbles, which is something like, I wonder if your mom loved chocolate chip cookies the way you do, which is just an opener, just to see if your child isn't in that moment ready to go there with you. It shows that you're ready to go there. And if they are, you don't push it, but you invite. So it becomes a co-creative thing. Like I said in the passage I read, Suzanne Bachner told me that the more we can carve out space for the absent birth parent, the less work the adoptee has to do to carve that space out on their own behalf, if we're assisting them and abiding with them on that, with pictures, stories, wondering, all these kinds of things where we let them know it's okay. I'm here with you. I'm on the journey with you, wherever it will lead you. I'm here with you. Sara, do you have anything to add to that? That was your experience as in a closed domestic.
Yeah, I think everything you just said, I was nodding along, and I wrote about this in an essay at one point, and I think you highlighted most of those things, Lori, but just I think I would add to that just a yearning for it to open up at some point, and I know sometimes there's death, sometimes there's situations where it truly isn't feasible, but if there's any chance, then just the yearning yourself, the child will feel that you are open to openness, and that you're yearning for that for them, because it's really hard growing up in that. It's just very hard growing up in a closed adoption and in a closed emotional landscape where you can't discuss adoption. I mean, that was my landscape, and it's very hard. It leads to secret keeping. It leads to having to, live different lives and pretend, not present your full authentic self, which makes an already shaky situation from an attachment situation even more shaky, because you're not presenting your true self. You have to keep things inside, bottled up, and a loyalty shifts forward and all kinds of things. So everything you said, yes.
Well, that's a rookie mistake, being on mute after all these years on Zoom. Thank you everyone who joined us this evening, and thank you Sara, Kelsey, and Lori for sharing so much with us tonight and for volunteering your time with us this evening. Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization serving individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care through support, education, and advocacy. We're a membership organization, and we hope that you'll consider joining us as a member. To find out more about the organization and support our work, you can visit us at our website, adoptionnetwork.org. We're going to pause the Monday evening speaker series through the holidays, and we'll pick this back up right after MLK weekend. And we hope that you'll join us for some of our other upcoming programs. Check out our calendar and our website, and we look forward to seeing everyone soon. And if you could take a moment and fill out the survey, the link is in the chat right now. Thanks, everybody.